In this tutorial, I will show you how to work with PolyFX and how to apply a Spline Wrap in order to create an animation. So right here I'm going to show you an example of what we're going to achieve in this tutorial. So here we go. Got something very simple with a plane, and if you take a look at this, it's just we applied into a nice helix, and just a basic animation, just a nice little path to that. Okay, so I created a morph camera. I will show you how we can actually animate a morph camera, kind of follow through, and see how we can make this final animation. Alright, so let's get started. Let's create a new document. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a plane, just a basic plane. Some of the properties I'm going to change on my plane is I'm going to make my width 75 centimeters. Let's make this 400. Let's leave that as 400, and my segments aren't going to stay default. Now, one of the things I like to do is basically I like to open up my display garage shading lines. That way I can see my details. The next step I gotta do is basically I'm going to create my helix that this path is going to be animated. So I'm going to select my helix. I'm going to do a couple of changes. I'm going to change on the start radius. I'm going to put about 27, 0 on the angle, 200. We're going to leave that as is. The end angle, let's do 376. Let's do the height about 1200. And now we have a pretty decent spline that we can have this plane to follow. Now, one of the things I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a spline wrap. And what I like to do is always, you're going to notice that there's a little arrow always pointing in a specific direction here. You can always change the axis in this little drop down menu. If you notice, well, you have the y-axis or you have your z-axis. So I'm going to use my z-axis kind of pointing towards the right, and I'm going to make my spline wrap a child of my plane. I'm going to select my helix, actually my spline, and then it's going to ask me where's the spline that you're going to be using. I'm going to use my helix as my reference, and there you have it. Now, one of the things that you got to fix right now is set to fit to spline. I want to keep my length here, and basically that's what I did for my animation. Now, if you notice, you have this nice little offset right here that allows you to animate that into the path. So we're almost there with the animation. Let's do some quick keyframings. So I'm going to say from 100. I'm going to set a keyframe on my offset, 90. Let's put that to 0. There we go. So now if I play this little guy, there we go. We have our animation. Alright, now for the cool things here, one of the things we're going to do is how we're going to make this PolyFX work for our object here. So one of the things I'm going to do, I'm going to select my plane. I'm going to hold my Alt key and G to make a group. And one of the things I'm going to do is I want to make this PolyFX a child of that null group that I just created. And that's how it's going to be affecting basically my plane with my spline wrap. So within my PolyFX, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my MoGraph effector. I'm going to use a plane effector. Okay, so now that I have my plane effectors, you're going to notice that basically it kind of took my plane and kind of broke it in pieces there. So it kind of creates this kind of pretty cool little effect. but I want to take it a little bit further with my animation. And what I want to do here, excuse me, is basically I want to animate my plane effector. I want to make it change my fall off to a linear shape. And basically what I want to do is I want to be able to make this big enough so that way it fits, you know, kind of like my whole plane here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click my plane effector, and I'm going to go under Cinema 4D tags, and I want to align to a spline. It's going to ask me what spline I want to apply into that area, and I'm going to use the same helix. I'm going to use tangential settings. That way, if you notice, if I start animating, see this? I think this I made it a little bit too big. Let's make it a little bit smaller there. So now basically we have this nice animation just kind of followed through, right? So let's go ahead and put this to 100. Let's put this back, set a keyframe, go to 90, and let's bring this to 0, right about there. Let's test this thing out. Let's see what it does. Nothing much is happening here. So one of the things I'm going to do, I got to play around with my timing of my tag here. So what I'm going to do is just basically one of the two I got to play around here. And let me see if I can just move this guy up, something like that. So now I can play around with this. Alright, but now it's just grabbing each individual kind of segment, kind of breaks down each segment that I have from my plane effector. From my plane. So now one of the things I'm going to do, I'm going to select my poly effector. I'm going to go to mode graph effector and select a random effector. Now this starts looking a little bit interesting. It's kind of cool in a way. So basically, if you notice, kind of you have like this swirl of shape just kind of following that path. But to basically create what I just did on the previous animation here, right? So we have this nice little effect going. I'm going to go back to my effect. I'm going to select my random effectors, go into parameters, deselect your position, and what we're going to control is this weight transform. I'm going to put like a number about 65 or so. Let's take a look at this, see what it does. Okay, so we don't have much going on here. One of the things I'm going to do is basically my plane effector. I wanted to do something here on my plane effector. I want to not control my position, but just my scale. I put my uniform scale to -1. And let's see what we got here. We got something interesting going, right? So now things are looking a little bit different. I'm going to go into my random. See if my random, there we go, -1. Now we're starting to get something very cool here. There we go. Right, so now we got something pretty cool in there. But one of the things, this is starting to look like kind of like a piece of paper, right? It's very thin. If we want to add a nice little thickness to this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my objects here, and I'm just going to group it again, because I'm going to grab a twist later on and just apply it to it. And I'm going to hold my Alt key. I'm going to go simulate cloth surface. You notice that it applies that cloth surface. Zero this out. I don't want extra geometry to be applied to the object, and I'm just going to crank this little thickness here, and you're gonna notice that we start getting some nice little thickness into our object. So you guys can always come and play around here, even with your positions. You can zero some of them out, right, and see what's gonna work the best for you. Not that position, let's say your up and downs, right, so like Z. So now you got this nice effect, kind of following. Right, so now we got this nice little animation. Very cool. So now enable for me to create that twist. I had a nice little twist in my animation. If you notice, my object just kind of creates this nice twist right about there. Okay, so I created a nice twist into my object. Now, one of the things that I did was did kind of like a little rig here, and it's just for my own purpose, so I can know the thickness of my twist in here. So I just grab my cube. Let me take a look at my plane. My plane's 75, so let's make that cube about 100. Let's put 100 by 100, and this we can make it about 1200, just to give it a number. Now I would like to have some segments on my Z, just enough. 25 is fine. And what I want to do is I'm just going to duplicate my helix, and I'm going to select my object, and I'm going to drop a spline wrap to that. Make sure that arrow is always aiming towards the direction that you want your spline wrap to work. Okay, you see now it's going to the Z axis. Select your spline wrap, drop the helix in there, and now you got this object in there. Now, why in the world I did this? Now, the reason I'm going to use this is just as a reference. I'm going to hide it later on. I'm going to group all these little guys, and I'm going to drop a twist in here. So I'm going to create a twist deformer right here. It's going to be a twist deformer. Now, what I like to see is what angle my twist is going to be acting, right? So it's basically going in this direction. So that means I need to rotate this 90 degrees, and basically I've got to make sure that is big enough. So I'm going to make this about, I don't know, let's make it about 1500, and I'm going to make it a child of that cube, and it says fit to parent, and there it is. So the cool thing about this is basically that I can come here and I can rotate this. You see, I can twist this little guy out. So remember, I'm just using this whole thing as a reference. I'm going to group this so I can hide it, but I'm going to copy my twist here. Now let me hide everything else so I don't see it. Now this twist that I have in there, I'm going to make it a child of this whole grouping that I have. Okay, and there you see now that my twist is starting to work. There we go. So now we got this nice little twist. Alright, very cool. Now some of the things that I like to do when I work with my deformers is, you see here my deformers, they're like on my way, kinda doesn't let me see what I'm doing. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna select I'm gonna start with my plane effectors, and if you go under basics on the visible in editor, I can turn that off. The same thing with my twists, I can turn those guys off, and I can do that for my spline wrap as well. There we go. Now I can see my animation. And there you have a quick way to animate something pretty cool by just using a simple shape like a plane, and there you have your cameras. Just, you just gotta play with your camera angles to see what you're looking for your shots. I'm gonna do a second tutorial on how to work with cameras and morphing cameras, but I just want to show you how to create this type of effects using Spline Wraps and PolyFX, or PolyFX, I'm sorry, and being able to animate them. Alright guys, I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial and that you have learned something today. If you have any questions, don't forget to put it on your comment box, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.